Hey, Christian metal friends, welcome in, man. Listen, more often than you could even probably imagine, whenever I put together a video having to do with STRYPER, I get random comments from people who will say, because I refer to them as a metal band all the time, right? I get random comments from people who say, STRYPER's not metal. They might be rock or hard rock, but they're not metal. So in this video, I decided to do my research, to dig in, to parse it out, and to come up with a clear definition of STRYPER in terms of whether or not they are a metal band. I think this is going to be really interesting, man. I'm glad you're with me for the journey. Let's talk about it. Rocking you up for Jesus Christ with classic style hard rock music and practical Bible teaching. In 1984, a revolution was born. With the release of the Yellow and Black Attack, STRYPER crashed onto the scene as a pioneering Christian metal band. They were loud, bold, and unashamed of their faith.
What is the whole STRYPER concept all about?
It's about one thing, and that's Christ. You know, we're here to rock and roll, but to spread a message that's different from 90% of the groups that are out there. You know, we're here to sing about Jesus Christ and to spread the good news, and hopefully to change lives, you know. We get thousands of letters, you know, from kids that have changed their lives, that have stopped doing drugs, they've stopped doing this or that, and they've accepted Christ, and He's changed their lives.
So here's Kyle, to hell with the devil. And how many people agree with STRYPER that that is where the devil should go?
The tradition of throwing out the Bibles at the STRYPER concert.
Okay, well, I know you've been here twice, and both times you threw Bibles, and both times I didn't get one, and then I went looking for one after it was over. I thought, well, there'll be one laying around, and there were none.
Yeah, there's never any lying around. That's something that somebody said about us, that, yeah, they throw out Bibles, and they're always left and trampled upon. And as a joke, there's never one left, you know. So.
For fans of heavy music at that time who had cut their musical teeth on secular bands like Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, and Judas Priest, STRYPER was a breath of fresh air, and they were definitely metal.
Now, earlier in the evening, we mentioned that there are several styles of gospel music. There is traditional, and then there is less traditional. Our next performers, after several years of opening for the Hemp Hills and the Florida Boys, now represent a style that is reaching huge audiences across America.
The youth of America have welcomed them with open arms and ears to their messages. They're known to break tradition with a hammer. As they perform, they distribute Bibles to all their audiences. Get ready for STRYPER!
Now in the 80s, what people called metal is a little different than what people call metal today. Metalheads back in the early 80s would frequently lump bands like Kiss or AC/DC or Def Leppard all under the metal umbrella. By today's standards, those bands would be considered classic hard rock. But back then, if you had screaming guitars and soaring vocals and attitude, you were metal. And STRYPER had all of that with something else. They had an unwavering message about faith in Jesus Christ.
You guys want to know what STRYPER stands for? That's the letters, each letter. I think, yeah, I got a shirt on right here. Salvation, through, redemption, yielding, peace, encouragement, and righteousness.
the juxtaposition between being a hard rock metal band and a Christian band, has there ever been any interesting scenarios that have arisen with you guys playing on shows with bands who don't share your beliefs? Because let's face facts, within the genre of metal, there are some bands whose entire brand is the antithesis to what you guys talk about in your music.
Exactly, and it's okay for them to do it, but not okay for us to do it.
Explain.
You know what I mean? I've always got a kick out of that, and I find that laughable. You know, why can't all these bands that are satanic go out and do it and not get poked fun at or questioned or put on the microscope, but then a Christian band comes along and plays metal, and then they're a joke? It's a contradiction, and it's unfair. The thing is about STRYPER, the difference between STRYPER and other Christian rock bands or metal bands is STRYPER is a rock band that became Christians. All the other Christian bands, or most of them, are Christians that became a rock band. You know, we grew up on the streets of L.A. We were playing with Rat, Motley Crue, and Guns N' Roses, and all these bands back in, 81, 82, 83, 84. And we decided that we didn't want that path anymore. We were getting drunk and drugged up and, with different women night after night, just like the rest of them. But it led us to nowhere. I hated it. I didn't like waking up in fountains, passed out, on my face. And I just felt like, okay, this is stupid. What does this get you? It ages you, or it'll outright kill you. And I don't need this. This isn't rock and roll. This isn't the rock and roll I want. So we got out of it. We decided, you know what? We had gone to church earlier on in our lives, and we felt like we want to get back to that. We want to get back to something that does, keep you clean and sober, and that does mean something. And at the end of our lives, we can be proud of, instead of how many joints we smoked or how many drugs we took or alcohol we drank or whatever. It's like, who cares? Gene Simmons counts how many women he slept with. Wow, well, that's something to be proud of,
I think he's inflating the numbers, too.
Of course he is. Everyone inflates. They always add to their stories. Like, Nikki Sixx talks about how many times he died, It's like, there's so many over-embellishments, it's just ridiculous. And you really have to question what's true and what's false. The thing about STRYPER is, love us or hate us, we took a stand for something, and something that's not popular. We didn't do it to be popular. We didn't do it as a gimmick to make money. If we wanted to make more money, we wouldn't have done it. We would have continued on being just a regular rock band, and you know what? We would have been a lot more popular, made a lot more money. We did it because this is what we really believe, and this is where we place our faith, and this is our lives. We live it. What you get is what you get. And like I said, hate it. That's fine. But at the end of the day, you got to at least respect it, because we've stood our ground.
STRYPER was right there in the metal trenches of the early and mid-'80s, banging it out with bands like Motley Crue and Quiet Riot and Dokken and Rat and so many other metal bands of the day. And while many of us who are watching this already know that, some of us watching may not have been around at that time. And so you don't understand that all of those big hooky riffs, powerful anthemic choruses, in the 80s, that was metal.
It's nice to have a band that represents something, a metal band that represents something beyond your basic thrashcore, evil, wordless garbage.
Bye. See you real.
However, by the late 1980s and into the early 90s, Christian metal and metal in general saw the rise of heavier subgenres of metal. Bands like Tourniquet that had a heavy kind of thrash vibe. And Mortification, who pushed Christian metal in the direction of death metal. The sound, the vibe, and the definition of what was metal was shifting. It was becoming faster and heavier and harder. More aggressive forms of metal became more prominent. Compared to these heavier, more aggressive bands, STRYPER began to sound to many listeners like hard rock. The rise of bands like Believer with their intense progressive thrash, and bands like Living Sacrifice with their brutal mix of metalcore with death metal. even further refined what fans of hard music were thinking of when they said metal. The heavier it got, the less up-and-coming fans who didn't have any memories from the day associated bands like STRYPER with metal. By the 2000s, Christian metal was dominated by extreme heaviness, with many metal subgenres embracing drop tunings and growl vocals, breakdowns and thrashing guitars. And as is kind of becoming the theme for this video, for younger metalheads, that was becoming the new standard of metal. It's not hard to understand why they would associate STRYPER's more melodic, riffy approach with hard rock. But for those of us who came up through the 80s, man, we'll always remember STRYPER as that Christian metal band that busted onto the scene and began to change the world in many of our worlds. I know they changed my world. I've said this in many other videos. I love so many Christian metal bands, but STRYPER is unique, at least for me, in that STRYPER, they jumped right into the arena with all of the secular bands. They jumped on to MTV.
Hey everyone, I'm Tim Gaines.
And I'm Robert Sweet, and we're STRYPER.
They came into my family room. They weren't waiting on me to go to the Christian bookstore, man. They were distributed right there beside Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and whoever else. And for this confused teen in the 1980s, they were a beam of light and clarity and a reminder that the gospel was real, that God loved me. They heralded a message that called me to a place of repentance, man. It was awesome. And some of you who are metalheads out there who came up in the day, man, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I find it really interesting that, at least at the time of this recording, STRYPER's new album is called When We Were Kings. When I first heard that title, I wasn't sure what it meant, and then I discovered they were hearkening back to the 80s, when they were on top, when To Hell with the Devil was multi-platinum, and they were selling out arenas. Dude, they had the sound, they had the vibe, they had the look, they had the attitude, and on top of that, praise the Lord, they had a message about Jesus. It was metal all the way, and it was impactful. Albums like Soldiers Under Command, To Hell with the Devil, and In God We Trust are undeniable metal classics. And STRYPER's influence on the Christian metal genre is, in my humble opinion, unmatched. So whether you personally categorize STRYPER today as metal, hard rock, or something in between, one thing is absolutely for certain. STRYPER were and are iconic pioneers of the style of music we know and love to call Christian metal. I am so glad that God brought STRYPER into my life back in the day when I was that confused teenager, and He used them to remind me that Jesus is the way, and to call me to surrender. They reminded me in a powerful way that I could relate to as a metalhead, that the devil is just a liar and a thief. And from that day to this one, they have continually encouraged me to keep the fire burning. Keep your eyes on Jesus.